just started the stream. Give me just 1 second, guys. We're still setting it up. I am running a lot of things on my laptop right now, so we might have to deal with a little bit of latency. All right, so my talk today is going to be Linux for hackers. Real quick, before I get started, I want to have a couple of questions for y'all. Can I get a real quick show of hands? Who here has Kali Linux installed in a VMware or in some kind of VM and they could follow along potentially? That's a lot. That's perfect. If you guys are interested in following along with my talk today, you definitely can. It's a beginner-friendly talk. It should be pretty easy to grasp. What about not Linux, or not Kali, just any Linux in general? Does anyone have? Okay, perfect. You might have to install a couple of tools, but if you have root access to your machine, if it's running on your machine, you still could follow along with the talk, and I heavily encourage that. For those of you that haven't raised your hands, that's totally okay. We are streaming this talk right now. We'll put the link in chat afterwards, so you can go back and look at the cool things that I did during this talk and give it a shot for yourself. I do have one kind of silly little surprise at the end of this talk. There might be a reward, there might be a little prize. We'll see how that goes. But my only advice to you is maybe pay attention during some of the more interesting parts of the talk. With that, let me get started. Oh, it's just slow. Perfect. So what is Kali Linux? I'm sure you guys have heard us mention Kali a lot. This is not the first time you've heard it, but what exactly is it? It is a Debian-based operating system, and it's specifically designed for pen testers and for security auditors. So think of it as just like Windows or Mac that you're running on your computer. It can be run exactly like your Windows machine on your computer, and it's just the way that you interact with the actual hardware on your laptop. If you're taking operating systems right now, you know it can get a little bit more complex than that, but that's how we're going to be thinking about it right now. Now, we will be interacting with it in a slightly different way than just having it instead of your operating system, but I'll get to that in a second. It's nothing scary. Just think of it as Windows or whatever you daily use. The benefits to using Kali Linux and the reason that we encourage it so much is for a couple of really good reasons. The first one is that it's really compatible. It is just built, it is Linux. Writing scripts in for it, writing programs for it. Programmers do tend to favor writing things in Linux, in Unix systems, instead of making a Windows version for it, instead of making a Mac OS version for it. A lot of scripts, a lot of tools that we use are based and geared towards Linux systems. Another really good thing is that Kali is plug and play. You can just set it up, and with minimal customization, you can just have it ready to go. Some other Linux distributions like Arch, nothing wrong with Arch, but it can take a little bit of customization to actually get it running. It's not that easy out of the box. I do like Arch, however. I do recommend it, but not for beginners. Definitely not as easy to just get up and start using. I did mention that we would be interacting with Kali Linux a little bit differently, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, but we'll be using it in a hypervisor or a virtual machine. This offers a couple of really, really great features, such as if we're messing around with malware or messing around with something just a little sketchy, we can always roll back to a previous version. And again, our daily driving, our normal operating system isn't being affected by that malware, or at least if we're following good security protocols. Another thing is, you can continue using your normal operating system. So you can keep using Windows, you can keep using Mac, but you can also have a virtual machine that you can spin up that has all of the Kali benefits that we're going to keep discussing. Again, if you mess up your workspace, if you don't have to deal with file management or anything, you can just reset it to a previous version and be done with that. One massive upside of Kali Linux, and the main reason that I recommend it so much that I did not get to yet, is all of the preloaded tools. Now, Kali Linux comes with a ton of tools which we'll get to in a second, that you don't have to take time and download separately. This is really useful for, let's say that you're a pen tester, or more likely, you're working on a CTF, and you're like, oh, gosh dang it, I don't have XYZ tool. I don't have Nmap ready to go. And you have to take a second, break your concentration, break your flow, and go and install it. It's not the biggest deal, but having everything in that pre-built VM ready to go, not having to take a second and install new tools, is really helpful, especially for beginners, because you might not know what tools you need. You might not know what solutions, what problems need what kind of tools. And a couple of those tools we're going to go over today is Metasploit, which I will go over in a couple of slides. Nmap, which is a really, really great tool for network scanning. You can scan ports, you can discover ports with it on a system or a network, and it's really good for finding vulnerabilities. I'll demonstrate that in just a little bit, but we will use Nmap to find a couple of vulnerabilities today. My personal favorite tool that just comes pre-built into Kali is Cherry Tree. It is nothing super fancy, it's just a note-taking app. But the reason I like it so much is because it's built in a tree-like system. So you can have multiple different overarching ideas with many leaves attached to them. Somehow, it just works for me. I really like it. I recommend it. If you're going to be using Kali, it's kind of nice to give it a shot. It's built for pen testers, so people that are having to quickly pivot from idea to idea, try multiple exploits, they like using it during their job. And I'll pull it up and give a quick demo. So let's say I've got this talk, Linux for Hackers, and I want to add a subnode. We just talked about Metasploit, and I can add that it's good for awesome. And then I can go back to this subnode or upper node and add a child node called Cherry Tree. And I can say I like it for notes. Another one we can add, same thing, talk about Nmap, port scanner. And all of these are all child nodes of this overarching node, which is Linux for Hackers. I really like it. Again, it comes default with Kali, so if you're taking notes with Kali, if you're working on a CTF, you don't need to switch to any other note-taking app. It's all right there for you. So for anyone that's still a little bit intimidated by the idea of using Linux, which I totally get, it is not very intuitive, especially if we've grown up with using Windows or Mac, some more GUI-focused OS. It is not easy to get used to doing things in a terminal and a command line. I'm going to go over a very, very short demo just to show that it really isn't all that different. Another thing is I do want to recommend two resources that I've used myself when I was learning Kali, because not that long ago I had never used Kali or any other Linux distribution. The first one I want to talk about is Bandit Over the Wire. It is kind of like a CTF to learn how to do CTFs. A lot of the challenges require just like navigating files in Linux, making a directory, deleting a directory. I think the first challenge does require just learning how the ls command works. So it's a really good resource. It's built like a CTF, so it's engaging, it's fun. You can do all the challenges, and by the end of it, you learn how to use Unix to do CTFs. I think that is their mission statement. It's like this is a war game to learn how to make learn how to do war games. The second one is this really good Code Camp YouTube video that I watched when I was learning as well. He does go into a little bit more depth than I do in this talk. He really goes over like a scripting demo. I think he also does an Nmap, but he builds his own port scanner. If you have a couple of hours that you're willing to spend just learning how Linux works, and he also helps you set up Kali as well, I would recommend that. That's a good demo. Speaking of demos, I'm going to do a real quick demo of my own. Let me spin up my Kali VM. Has anyone ever checked out Bandit Over the Wire? Oh, a couple? Okay, sick. Awesome. What do we think of it? Nick?
It's great.
It's great? Yeah, it's a lot of fun, right? It's not too technically complex like other CTFs are, but it does give you a chance to practice in a capture the flag-esque scenario. We might have to deal with a little bit of latency problems on my laptop. It is taking just a second for this VM to open up. Another thing I want to mention is, I'm daily driving Ubuntu, so I have Ubuntu loaded up right now on my laptop, and that's kind of what I've been using. And that's probably, when you see this, that's just me like alt-tabbing. But Kali offers some customization. It's not the most customizable, far from it, but it does offer some cool tweaks that you can install. So I really like the GNOME interface that lets me alt-tab like that, and that Ubuntu and Fedora have. And you can install GNOME on your Kali. It's just a little checkbox, so that when you have it installed, it comes with GNOME features. You can mess around with it. It makes it really easy to adapt to Kali. If you hate the way that mine looks, you can obviously change it to any preferred display. I apologize for the VM taking a sec. We can move on and I can just come back to it. Let me make sure that it really is loading up though. All right, while that's loading, oh, perfect. So we've got the VMware. What you would do, it's really simple to set up a VMware. I really recommend VM Workstation just because it is one of the two alternatives. I know it's not open source, which is a deal breaker for some people, but VMware makes it a little bit easier to set up multiple VMs that communicate with each other, which is what I had to do for today's demo. I hope that, okay, perfect. I think it should be loading up this time. I will move on with the talk and we'll just come back to this, but it's nothing crazy. I was just going to do a little demo of how Kali Linux is really similar to an operating system you might be familiar with. Today we're going to be doing well, let's go over the tools first. So I talked about Metasploit earlier. I'm going to flesh it out a little bit. What Metasploit is a pen testing framework. What does that actually mean? I'll tell you. It is a massive collection of tools that we can use for exploiting some vulnerabilities. What it really offers us is just this really massive collection of pre-built scripts for already existing or already found vulnerabilities. All we really have to do is run each of these independent modules that it has for this vulnerability that we find, and Metasploit does the entire rest of it. So we don't have to write any scripts, we don't have to learn much about the vulnerability, we can just really just plug it and play it. This makes it really convenient for people that are just learning, so total beginners, and it's also really good for people that are working in the industry. If you're working as a pen tester, you have to deploy a ton of scripts in a short amount of time. You want to see what works, try and exploit, and then move on, note down if it works, if it doesn't. One great thing is it also has a really pretty user interface. It has a GUI that you can install if you want. All of these really nice beginner-friendly features do kind of give Metasploit a bad rep. Hacking purists, people that are more experienced in the field, do refer to Metasploit as more of a script kiddie tool. Because we don't really have to learn about the vulnerabilities. We just have to send the payload that we found in Metasploit. We don't have to learn about any scripting, any vulnerability at all. Which is exactly why you guys should be using it. Every single person in this room is still learning, and one of the best ways to learn is to actually go and get your hands dirty. You can learn all the theory that you want, but installing Metasploit and trying different exploits is one of the best ways to learn. I highly encourage you guys to go home and just download it and just mess around with it. Metasploit isn't the easiest. I'm making it sound super easy. There are some roadblocks you do have to learn, but it's a great tool to actually get started hacking. The next tool we're going to be doing is Nmap, and we'll get to that in a second. That would have been part of my demo. But why are we using Metasploit? We're going to be doing it on an Eternal Blue demo. So the demo today is going to involve exploiting an actual, real live vulnerability that was found in Windows 7 called Eternal Blue. So what Eternal Blue is it's a vulnerability in the file sharing service that Microsoft implemented in Windows 7. and earlier machines, I think, but Windows 7 is the most prominent, called SMBv1. So it's the Server Message Block version 1. By default now, SMBv1 service is disabled in all new Windows machines, and it's replaced by SMBv2 and SMBv3. But the way that this exploit actually works is it's due to a bugged request handler. So the SMBv1, when sent a request containing malware or just an unauthorized request, instead of properly denying it, it will run whatever code was given. It's just improper handling, and that's what we're going to be exploiting. We're going to give it some malware, and then we're going to get it to run what we want. Some fun facts about Eternal Blue is that the NSA actually discovered this vulnerability first, and then withheld that information, like did not disclose it, for 5 years. And they were just using it as a backdoor to backdoor into people's machines, and then eventually they did disclose it to Microsoft after it was leaked. Who here remembers WannaCry? It was this big ransomware attack. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. You might not just remember it right now, but it was, I think, like 2017. It was this massive ransomware attack. Everyone was talking about it. WannaCry was based off Eternal Blue. It was one of the exploits that it used to encrypt people's systems. So what we're going to be using Eternal Blue for is to do a reverse shell into our victim system. So what a reverse shell is that it lets us remotely access a victim's computer through a shell. It's pretty self-explanatory. But normally, if I want like remote access, if I want to open up a shell into my victim's computer, I would have to send them a request like, hey, can I open a shell in your computer? And like properly, their network would be like, no, absolutely not. Their computer would be like, no, you can't open a shell. You can't just have a shell in our computer. They would correctly deny it. What we need is to bypass this proper denial by having their victim's computer, send us a request to open up a shell in their computer, in which case we would accept it because that's what we want. Most firewalls would block incoming request, but since it's an outgoing request, it'd be totally fine. And that's exactly where Eternal Blue comes in. So we have this faulty server messaging block that we can send a malware application to, and that malware will send us a reverse shell, which we can accept and connect to. So now comes the cool part. I'm going to do the actual demo. I will first pull up the Kali machine. It's running just a little bit slow. I hope that doesn't impact the talk, the demo. While we're waiting for it to load, Eternal Blue is a little bit outdated. It is, all Windows computers now will have either a patch for it or just will not be using SMBv1, which is kind of outdated. But while the SMBv1 bug was active, there were a couple of updates to Eternal Blue itself. There are some, same exploits, but there were different approaches to attacking SMBv1. So there was Eternal Romance and Eternal Synergy. One of them, I think Eternal Romance was exploiting a race condition in SMBv1, and Eternal Synergy was also exploiting similar thing that Eternal Blue did, but it was just a different version of doing it. So these were the similar type of exploit. They had the same end goal, but just very different approaches, which is really cool. I might have to end up turning off the stream just because I don't think my laptop can handle this. It's not booting up the VM.